Well, human trafficking continues to be a big problem in the country, and it's seemingly very complex. There's fear of reporting. At the same time, there have been increasing calls for government to do more. Advocacy groups claiming recently that the crime is rife, and we've got stats that show that 23% of children who go missing are never found. And then there's the issue of sex workers who also continue to be victims of human rights violations and gender-based violence. But as we heard earlier, they are not all victims of human trafficking. So the situation is a bit complex. Now, I'm joined in this discussion by the Deputy Minister of Justice, that's John Jeffrey, joined by Global NGO A21's Katie Madra. We're joined by UNISA's researcher and professor there, that's Dr. Marcel van der Vat, who does a lot of work in this area and also contributes to the nation's investigations and policy searches in terms of dealing with this scourge of human trafficking. And finally, in the studio, I've got Katle Horasibitse from Advocacy Group Sisonke. Deputy Minister, can I start with you for this part of the discussion? The law, is the law good enough as it stands, or do we need to tweak it further and strengthening it further?
Thanks. I'm not aware of anybody saying there should be any further changes to the law on trafficking. I think the problem is, as always is with laws, is the question of implementation. But this particular law, a lot of energy has been put into implementation. We have a national intersectoral committee for trafficking in persons, which includes both government and civil society. Mr. Van der Walt, Dr. Van der Walt is involved in that, as I think Katie is. That meets quarterly. We have a rapid response team that meets monthly to follow up on the cases. A lot has been done in terms of developing training manuals, having an integrated victim assistance, standard operating procedures established. There's data tools, UNODC work with regarding educating judicial officers on the matter. We've got a draft memorandum of understanding with civil society, between civil society organizations and departments. And then Home Affairs is also very concerned about this issue from an immigration and cross-border security. The civil society organizations, many of them, and they then find their way into things like the US Trafficking in Persons report, they will come with allegations. I personally met with the civil society organizations last year to really plead with them to ensure that trafficking cases that they were dealing with were reported to law enforcement. And there was an undertaking that would be done. And one of the issues there was that we would be giving feedback on the investigation. So I'm not sure why Marcel is saying that there's no feedback on investigations. That might have happened in the past, but I don't recall you asking for feedback to me, in particular, on any specific cases since that meeting. And unfortunately, what has been reported to us by the civil society organizations is, I think, very minimal, if nothing at all.
Why? Can I just ask, for example, I think Sisonke will be one of those civil society organizations, am I wrong? Why are you not reporting?
No, I'm talking about the civil society organizations working specifically in the sphere of trafficking.
Okay, have you asked them why? Yes, Deputy Minister. Yes.
I think there's I think Sisonke, look, I can't speak for them, but I think as was raised, that there would be issues, disputes over the extent of trafficking in the sex work sector, with many people saying that there's a lot of sex workers who are trafficked. Sex worker organizations, I think, saying that less so.
Okay.
Sweat conducted a survey of sex workers in Cape Town before the World Cup, so it's some time ago, and found very few. I think they interviewed every sex worker in Cape Town, or claimed that they'd done that, and I think they found very few people had been trafficked. There were disputes as to the definition of trafficking that they were used. So that's also a factor that needs to be looked at. Okay. So, there's a lot of different narratives.
Yeah, but I mean, it is a complex problem, and those different narratives are not helping us as a country to really stop this modern-day human slavery. Is A21 one of those organizations, Katie, that has been trying to engage with the government and report issues of human trafficking too?
Yes, we definitely are. A21 navigates or operates the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So we are a referral mechanism that refers cases of trafficking to partners and to government and to SAPS. Now,
so how do you respond to the Deputy Minister's assertion that unfortunately civil society organizations are not reporting enough?
I mean, I know that is something we discussed last year. I'm a bit disappointed with the response that we've had since that meeting. I know the Deputy Minister took an undertaking to say we will, as civil society, be getting feedback. And now we're not talking about hundreds of civil society organizations. We have a network where we partner together and we submit our stats together. In 2019, the hotline reported 103 cases to SAPS. We are still awaiting any feedback on 82 of those cases. This year, we have reported 68 cases to SAPS, and we are still awaiting feedback on 63 of those cases.
So the police seemingly not coming back to you. Unfortunately, we don't have the police in today's discussion, but it's a very important point that you are making, that you are requested to report, and you do report to the police, but you don't seemingly get a response. Deputy Minister, you are not Deputy Minister of Police, but you are in government. Do you have some idea of why would the police be taking so long to respond?
No. As I said, I asked for a meeting with civil society, which both Katie and Marcel were at, and had given the undertaking, as Katie has said, that there would be report backs. I assumed it was happening. I'm disappointed that neither Marcel nor Katie have come to me to say, look, in spite of what you said, we are not getting report backs. I'm disappointed that we have to talk to each other on in the media when there is this national intersectoral coordinating committee on trafficking. Why couldn't that be used? Why can't you email me, text me, whatever? Let me just also say, from government side, we are embarking on a study through the Department of Science and information to look at to try and run our own survey on the extent of human trafficking.
Yeah, the disappointment you are expressing, I can understand that, but the fact remains, you need to work together. As government and the civil society to try and get to the bottom of human trafficking. So listening to Marcel, listening to Katie now in this discussion, what do you think should happen next, Deputy Minister, to move forward? Because the law exists. Everybody says it's the best law. It's a good. Nobody's complaining about it. You said it is not being implemented. You're engaging with civil society. You've met with them. You're not getting feedback. They are saying they are reporting. They are not getting feedback. How are we going to resolve this?
Yeah, let me just clarify. I didn't say it's not being implemented. I said the problem with laws is how they're implemented. And with this particular law, government has put a lot of energy into ensuring that it is implemented. We need to work with civil society, and that's why we've got these structures. And I would really urge Marcel and Katie to use those structures. I would urge anyone who has information on human trafficking to report it to law enforcement. There was an issue that was raised in that meeting of some concerns of lack of trust of the police, and we'd also discussed mechanisms that could be followed if that were the case. I have not had any reports of those kinds of problems. And then I would also urge society in general, the community in general, the public, not to over-sensationalize, not to claim that something is trafficking when it's not, or you don't know whether it is or not. We need a proper perspective on this. But my point is basically the law is a good one. I haven't heard anyone here saying it's not. The structures are in place. The work is being done. We need to all work together to do that work.
Yeah, and you need to find each other with civil society. Marcel and Katie, I'm not going to go further on this. I think the point has been made. I think take up this matter with the Deputy Minister, giving the feedback. I think it's important. But I just want to bring up something, because, Katie, you mentioned when I asked you earlier whether South Africa is also a transit, and you spoke about porous borders. I've also seen on social media people blaming foreign nationals, saying in this country human trafficking, child trafficking is being committed specifically by Nigerian nationals who are in the country. They've been pointed out, and sometimes other foreign nationals. In your experience as A21, and from what you know, Katie, are foreign nationals in South Africa committing human trafficking crimes, and is it specific groups of foreign nationals?
That is a very complex question to unpack, and I could probably call on myself to unpack it further. But yes, there are foreign nationals who are perpetuating the crime, as there are South Africans perpetuating the crime. Remember, human trafficking is an organized crime which speaks on complicity on all levels. You've got civil society or general public, you've got business people, you've got government agencies. So in order for this crime to flourish, it's not just foreign nationals. There need to be people within South Africa that are allowing it to happen as well. And so I think we need to be very careful that we're not pinning it on one nationality or one people group. We do know of a number of international crime rings that operate, not just Nigerian crime rings, but I think that's for the police to speak into. But I would like to caution people against pinning it on one nationality and not looking at how we, and the way we operate as society and what we allow to happen, perpetuate the crime.
Yeah, Marcel, I've seen also reports saying that domestic trafficking in South Africa is really what's something that we are missing, that people are being trafficked from one town to another town. It's not just people coming across borders.
Absolutely. People can be trafficked from one neighborhood to the other. We've seen that. There's successful convictions on that. So I want to echo what Katie has said. Be very careful to single out one nationality. I can just from experience, five of the last 6 cases I testified in where we've got convictions, 5 of the last 6 was West African national human trafficking criminal networks. So absolutely, domestic trafficking is a problem. And I think, again, I want to echo what Deputy Minister John Jeffrey said. I think I've spoken about our trafficking legislation in a number of countries. I would argue we've got one of the best pieces of legislation in the world. I would love for us to, at some stage, discuss the definition of abuse of a position of vulnerability. Once you understand that definition as a subset in the Trafficking Act, you realize how many people are predisposed to the issue of trafficking. But absolutely, domestic trafficking, I would argue, is an overwhelming majority of the cases that we are seeing in the country.
And we've seen cases where some traditional practices, like ukutwala, where a young woman would be taken against her will and taken and literally carried away from her home, taken forcibly to go and be married to somebody else. There have been cases in court where people have been found guilty after the young woman would be freed, and then they'll go and lay a charge. And will that be an abduction, or will that fall under human trafficking, Marcel?
Yeah, so obviously we have case law on that. The Deputy Minister John Jeffrey can also speak to the Jezile matter, which was a distorted claim practice of ukutwala, which the High Court in Cape Town found, while it was distorted, it actually boils down to trafficking. But just to come back to the issue of prevalence and statistics, I actually had an interview, a 3-hour-long conversation with one of the accused that's been convicted on that matter. Very, very rural, remote area in the Eastern Cape. And this gentleman shared story after story after story, how prevalent and rife this is, going on for a number of years, girls as young as 11, 12, 13. And yet we've only seen 1 or 2 of those convictions. Again, giving us an idea that what we're actually dealing with is the tip of the iceberg. But yes, in short, there are traditional practices, harmful practices that is often distorted and exploited by criminal elements. And our courts are able, because we've got a solid, great piece of legislation, our courts are able, again, to discern between a cultural practice and a distorted, harmful cultural practice. Firstly, the second thing our courts are able to do is to clearly delineate between what is a prostitution, or as it's called, sex work, and what is trafficking. So the issues are not conflated by our legislation. It's not conflated in courts. We need to understand that.
It's good to hear that. Katlego, before we go to the break, to the final segment of discussion, the law for you from a Sisonke perspective in terms of this issue of human trafficking and this sometimes this complex place of sex work, is the law enough? Of course, prostitution in South Africa, as you said, it's still, sex work in South Africa is still, what you call it, criminalized. Yeah. What's your view about the law?
Our law doesn't have what we can put into words like implementation frameworks. It's the law that whereby it will be still kind of like reviewed. For example, like sex work are still being criminalized by the colonial laws. Like we're talking 1957, and we are still in 2020.
Do you think that decriminalizing sex work would assist in really ensuring that human trafficking is understood properly?
It will assist in a way that sex workers themselves are going to be able to say, officer, at room 257, there are 3 women who are trafficked. Can you therefore do something? The reason why sex workers, they find themselves in a position they cannot even report, because of once you report that there's a child that is being exploited in brothel number 375, then when the police come, they would arrest everybody. Then on its own, it makes even sex workers not to report such crime.
Okay, good point there. We'll continue our discussing shortly as we go to the last part of this important discussion on human trafficking in our country. I'm going to be asking our panel, consisting of Katie Mudrao of A21, John Jeffrey, the Deputy Justice Minister, and also the researcher from UNISA, myself and Devat, and Katlego Rasibitse from Advocacy Group Sisonke. What do we need to do actually now? We have a good law in place. There's a bit of confusion about what is human trafficking. What else? What are the steps that need to be done? Are the police properly capacitated to deal with human trafficking or not? Stay with us.